I'm Device from Australis, and welcome to Thorin's YouTube channel. It's a joke-free zone.
Right, I'm here for another one of my Reflections interviews, and this one is going to be with Pita, who was a professional player in 1.6. I'd say a sort of like semi-pro maybe in CSGO, and obviously he's had a coaching career since then. And I'll actually say, I'll just give people, I normally don't prep people like this, but an interesting detail about this interview is we will touch on some potentially hot button topics, as they say in the journalism world. But I'll say I actually expect it's going to be quite interesting, because for people, no matter what you may have heard or may think based on some of the stories that we might reference, actually Peter's pretty much been known through his whole career to be a pretty vocal individual, try and speak out against things he doesn't agree with, etc. For someone who's like technically Swedish in some sense, pretty out there with some of his opinions. So I'm looking forward to seeing where this one goes. So my first question for you, mate, is obviously I was around in all of 1.6 and especially the Swedish scene. Like I knew very, very, very early on, even before they did that Swedish esports league in the early days, I knew like Sweden is the place for producing talent, because I used to see every single top team. They could just like make a player change, bring in a guy you didn't know, and like suddenly he was winning the world championship or he was in the finals or something. So I've been following all the up and coming talents. And so what a lot of people wouldn't know is I used to even try and follow like who are the team lists at those like the Rendezvous lands, the Birdie lands, these small like amateur to semi-pro lands where you'd get a couple of top pros go there, you'd get a whole bunch of semi-pros who want to make it. And that was kind of, if people don't know, like my joke would be, it'd be like Sweden's got Counter-Strike talent. Like if you go there, you kind of show your chops, you know, you show you've got skills. Next thing you know, you might be in a team that's like a little bit better, then you go to a qualifier, and then the history's from there, right? But what's interesting is, I noticed your generation of when you came up in CS 1.6 was actually more towards the end of the game. So was it actually the case, like, were you playing in the early 2000s, the mid 2000s? Like I only started to see you basically from like 2008 onwards. And even then it was kind of a gradual climb. So how early were you involved with CS 1.6?
Well, basically, I think the first time that I played CS was in 2001. That was like the first time I touched it. My parents were very against me sitting in front of the computer playing. They wanted me like to focus on school or to do like normal sport activities. They weren't that like familiar with the whole computer world, and very strict in that term. So I never had my own computer, which meant that I just played at my friend's house, went to internet cafes, played like here in Stockholm. Eventually, when I got 16 years old, my dad bought me my first computer. So that was in 2007. So that was when I could like start to grind. And I do believe that was when like it took me a year and a half to get into like a semi-professional Swedish team. That was Big Reap in 2008, I believe.
Sure. Right. When you describe like that, like the internet cafe culture, I've noticed actually, sadly, the last few times I went to Sweden and I've tried to go to like Inferno Online in the big cafes, like if you go in now, it's a bit depressing. There's not that many people playing CS anymore. Like it used to be everyone. In fact, famously, if you ever walked in there with like obvious people like Heaton or something, mate, every little like 12-year-old kid's head would turn, like they'd snap off the neck almost, you know. Now I'm not even joking. I feel like you could walk in with some like Olaf Meister and JW and half of them are just playing Fortnite and they'd be like, who's that like? What was it like back in the day if you went in the internet cafes? Because Stockholm was obviously the place for them as well.
Yeah. I like Inferno Online. I think that's like a lot of people know about that cafe, and I remember it was like pretty small when I walked in there at first. It was like 50 computers. Today, I think they have like 300, and the venue is like 4 or 5 times bigger than it was when I was there. But I actually remember the first time that I went there. And now that you mentioned Heaton, I remember that he was there. They had their own like practice room. And I remember I went in there with my friend and his dad, because that was the only way for me to be able to go there, is like go with someone's friend's parents, because my parents wouldn't allow me to go there by myself. So when we walked in there, I saw them. I didn't know who the other players were. Like I wasn't that into CS, but I knew who Heaton was. And I remember just standing behind that practice room. I don't know how old I was, maybe like 13, 14, and then just like stand behind and watch him play deathmatch. So that was like one of the first experience that I had about the internet cafe. But as you say, CS was the thing back then. Everyone played CS, but nowadays there's There is some people playing CS because I've been there recently, but it's not the same. It's a lot bigger, and the like close feeling of people, like maybe everyone knowing each other. It's not the feeling like that anymore. People have their own computers. I don't know if that was maybe the thing back in 2005 or 2004 that maybe everyone didn't have a computer, and the computers at the internet cafes were good, or whatever that was. I don't know, but yeah.
When you say that part, because you've referenced them a couple of times now, the situation with your parents, right? I'm assuming based on your nationality, like they immigrated to Sweden, right?
Yeah.
From Bosnia or somewhere in that region, right?
Correct, yeah.
And is that the case then? Because I know a lot of people, they might not understand this. Because again, people will just see like you played in Swedish teams and think you are just a Swede, right? My question on that level would be, that's one of those areas where when people make it as a pro, they always like to go like, see, like my mom and dad told me like, don't do it, but like I proved them wrong. But I actually always say like, with a lot of parents, like depending on what the kid's aim is, like if they're going to quit school and stuff, I would actually tell the parents, you're right. You should just tell them like, like do it on the side. If you get good, try and go semi-pro, like I actually try to be very reasonable. Well, one thing I can totally understand is if you're the son of people who are coming from a country, let's be real, it was worse than Sweden at the time, especially at that time, let's be real, like it obviously had a little civil war and shit. I'm guessing when they make it to Sweden, their dream is you become a doctor, a lawyer, you have this dream life you could never have in Bosnia. So instead, if you come and you say like, I'm basically going hardcore in video games, I can understand why it wouldn't go down well. What was it like in that sense?
Yeah, everything you say is 100% correct. The lawyer, I don't know how many times I've heard about that. In some sense, like I do understand them because as in any other situation where people are fleeing from a war, they are leaving a lot of stuff behind, like everything that they have worked for their whole life. So my parents came here to Sweden with zero, came here with 3 small children. I think like sometimes when bad things like that happen to someone, I think that's when you value things in life. And I think that they saw the value of having like a diploma from like a degree from the university, and because they saw that okay, the thing that we had in Bosnia and now we come to Sweden, like everything that we have learned doesn't like really matter. The only thing that would matter was a diploma. So I think their mindset was, okay, if anything happens in Sweden, if you need to go to another country, at least you will have something as in the diploma. So that's why they were very like focused on me and my brothers finishing school. But yeah, I mean, I don't like make it too much of a issue. It was just like, okay, they didn't want me to sit in front of the computer. I understand why now. I didn't understand back then. But yeah, I mean, I'm glad that they were like that because then I could focus on both things and finish both things or something in that sense.
Obviously, we're going to talk soon about one of your early teams, which was the Big Grip team. And in that core was a player who, actually, funnily enough, now CSGO fans will know him. It's Jumpy, because obviously he was the coach of FNATIC one point in time in CSGO. And back in 1.6, interesting detail, a lot of fans don't know, because again, this is just too much of a boomer reference, but he was also like the younger brother of another guy who was a pro player called Magix, I think would how you say it. I got tricked by the Danish guy's name. That was like way back in the day. But the interesting detail for this and me, I noticed like even before you guys made it in this team, you already had a connection going back to past teams. So who was this guy to you? You were pretty friendly with him, right?
Yeah, I mean, Jumpy was, in my sense, he was a player above my level, and I got to know him through a friend here outside of Stockholm where I lived who knew him, and he was also better than me, so I got to play with those two guys, and I was very eager to become better and to learn, and I was like a young talent, 16, 17 years old, and I got the chance to play with them. And like Jumpy for me was a guy with much more knowledge than me. He had a very specific kind of calling style. Like when we looked at the top teams, he wasn't calling anything like they did. He was the guy that I had the chance to become a better play, I'd say, because when I teamed up with him in Big Reap, and we managed to play some tournaments, and we managed to beat some very good teams back then. SK, we played against FNATIC, we beat them sometimes. I do believe we made some finals. That was like the peak, the peak, or like the breakout for me.
Sure. So yeah, as you say, one of the interesting things is also why I alluded to like the LAN scene back then, because one of the very interesting things that doesn't really exist in CSGO, although I guess maybe with the online period it does, is the amount of variety of teams you could play if you were a top team. If people don't understand, all the big tournaments that like I would talk about in my videos, they're international tournaments. Even if it's like a Dreamhack, like you can't just get into that tournament. You have to like win the BYOC if you're not like the top 3 Swedish teams, basically. But then what was interesting is because we had tournaments like obviously famously the World Cyber Games, even if you were the best team in the world and you were FNATIC, you were SK, you had to still prove it against all the other Swedish teams. And famously, one of the reasons Sweden doesn't have that many medals at the World Cyber Games is there's a lot of times that like a big name got beaten by an underdog team, and that's actually what a lot of people made their names. So I remember one of the things you're alluding to, even before you got this lineup where Zet came over from SK, you actually beat him when he was in SK, when you were like, it was an Inferno Online tournament, I remember. And that was the summer where they lost to a bunch of teams. They lost to the Lemondogs guys, and like this was kind of like the next crop of talent coming through. So with that core of players, is before you got Zet, you had Delpan there, you had Modi, you had a bunch of players who clearly went on to be very skilled players, etc. Right? I get the vibe when I look at this team. Right? Okay, you and Jumpy were kind of like less well known. The Hib guy had sort of like he'd made it like to like breaking into tier 1, but hadn't really gone much further. But if people don't know, Delpan and Modi were kind of like the bad boys, as it were, whatever. Like there's a like pretty soon everyone thought Delpan cheated, and everyone just thought Modi was an arsehole. So by the way, funnily enough, some of those themes repeat through their careers. So who was this team? Because obviously, once you got the pieces in place, it was a fucking sick team immediately.
Yeah. I don't know what happened there, because that whole year for me was, I seriously like thought of, should I just like not play anymore? Because we had so many player swaps, and I was in that Big Reap lineup before Modi and Delpan and those guys came in, and in the beginning of the summer 2009, I don't know how they came into the team. But some of our old players, they left. We had Snydan, who was like a legendary SK in-game leader. He was in that Big Reap lineup, and he left because Sneal, who played with me in Big Reap, he got picked up by SK. So all of a sudden, people started to leave the team. So the only players left was me and Hib. And we didn't like know what the future was. I don't think any of us had like any ideas of, okay, let's just bring in 3 players and play it. But the thing was like, okay, we had a invitation to play Dreamhack Stockholm. And we're like, okay, let's gather 3 people and just play it. And at that time, Delpan, Jumpy, and Modi, they played, I do believe they played together in another team called Pro Staker. And we just asked them if they wanted to come over, and we played like together for 1 week, and then we went to this Dreamhack Stockholm tournament, and that's when we played this WCG qualifier, and we played against FNATIC, and we did beat them on 1 map. We lost 1 map on overtime, and that was like FNATIC in their prime with Gux, Forest, Get Right, like they were the
monsters, yeah.
Yeah, so. But once we played against them, and we like, for me, I remember like the exact feeling when I played against them, because in my opinion, when I watched them, when you just watch a player or a team, you're starting to idolize and fantasize that they are so much better than you. And then when you go into the server and actually play against them, I remember like that was the first time I played against them, and I expected them to just crush us. But when we started to like win rounds, I remember a specific. I think that's also a video where I wrote like, it feels like we're playing a like mix cup. That was my feeling, because they weren't shooting back. So the reality that I had built up for myself, where they are the gods, where they are unstoppable, that was just like, in that moment, it was just falling apart. So I was like, what the fuck's going on? I remember that feeling so good. But that whole match, that whole tournament gave me, and I believe also the other guys in the team, gave us the courage or the like will to try to improve and become better. And that's where we like took off. Played against SK maybe 2 or 3 weeks after that. We beat them pretty confident, 16-6 or something, 16-5. in 2 maps. Still pretty unknown to the international scene. We went on to beat the H2K lineup or the Lemondogs lineup, whatever they were called, and we went to Dubai after that. And yeah, so it like that period of time in my life was really good because we went from 0 to 100 in like 2 weeks. It was insane.
Yeah, as you say, you set it up perfectly. Then you go to this international tournament. And one of the other things is, as people should be able to imply by what I said earlier, even if the team that's like, you know, the semi-pros do a great result at like the Swedish qualifier, it's kind of like even now, everyone goes, well, you know, domestically, there's always like interesting matchups, blah, blah, blah. People know each other. And so then you think, right, well, they're not going to do it internationally, are you? Because normally it takes, like, again, it takes many, many years sometimes to get used to playing internationally. You have to get the travel and all that. This IEM Dubai tournament is one of the most ridiculous because I even remember, I think part of it, by the way, is because people thought Delpan cheated. So even I know a lot of pros were like low-key hoping you all failed and it was like the team just collapsed, you know? So I remember, right, you went there and you were in the most stacked group, right? You had like FNATIC, you had a whole bunch of like the Koreans, you had all these really good players, right? Then you 5-0'd the group. You won every game, including over FNATIC, right? So then what people did was like, well, it's best of ones, isn't it? You know, like once it gets to the actual groups. And then in the playoffs, you played Vitriolic, who, by the way, was Neo, Taz, and the Poles, if people don't know. So we're talking, by the way, about the people who, not that long after this, or maybe, I think it was not that long after this, won the World Cyber Games and beat the FNATIC team, like the most epic final ever. You just literally, like, gorilla stomped this team. Like, I think they got 6 rounds over 2 maps or something, Pete. It was like some... So at this point in time, listen, even though you did lose to FNATIC in the final, it was their year. They were unbelievable. Give me some thoughts on this tournament, because this, again, it just sounds like some out of a movie, doesn't it?
Yeah, that was also insane. Like, in regards of you talking about Delpan cheating, to be honest, I was like, I don't know if he cheats or whatever, but okay, he plays decent on LAN. So yeah, my experience with him, like even before he joined the team, I was like, I don't know if that dude is legit, because when we practiced, he did shoot some wall bangs, and then we went to LAN and he started doing the same fucking wall bangs. I was like, wow.
And he just was that insane, to be fair, you know.
Yeah. So once I saw that he played the same online as he did online, that was like, okay, I can relax now. Then what he did prior to his career, I don't know. I've seen the clips. I will not judge. I have done that one too many times in my career. We can maybe talk.
There was a few I've sort of raised an eyebrow at, so yeah, I get your vibe.
Okay, but if we go back to the Dubai event, that was like our first. I think maybe for everyone except for Seth, was our first international event going to Dubai. Dubai was a city that in 2009 that was starting to get built up, and the hype was starting to build up around Dubai. So for me, telling that to my parents, to my friends, like I'm going to play Counter-Strike in Dubai, that's when my parents started to support me, because everything was paid, and we went there. We had a hotel with a pool on the roof, and like life was good. We came there, and I think since we did beat FNATIC prior to that, since we did beat SK, we had the feeling, okay, we can do it. We never thought in those sense like, yeah, we can beat Swedish team, but internationally we will not win. We didn't put any effort into what people said about us. Our only mission was just to go as far as we can and prove everyone wrong. So when we went into that tournament, when we played, I think we were only the first game. We were a bit cold, like not used to the setup and all that. But as soon as as the tournament progressed, we noticed that we're extremely good. And when we did come to the semifinals, and when we play against Vitriolic, I remember that day so good. Like one of the few days throughout my career where I can actually remember the feeling in the morning. Because the thing is, Dubai is, I think it's 3 hours time difference. So from Stockholm, so it's not that you're jet lag, but somehow I managed to become jet lag, just 3 hour difference. And I remember that me and Delpan, we shared a room in the hotel, and I remember I woke up at 5:30, something like that. Which is pretty early, and we had the semifinal was, I think, maybe at 10 that day, and then if we would win that, we would play the final in the evening. So I remember I woke up very early, and the first thing that I thought of was about the game, but the whole atmosphere in the team was like, we will beat these guys. We were so confident. I've never been that confident throughout my career after that. Everyone was on point. We knew that we would beat them. The question we had was just like how much we would beat them with. And the thing also, I had so much respect for that team. Like for me, everyone in Sweden had like idols, Forrest or Get Right, but my idol was always Neo in CS. So when I walked up and supposed to play against Neo, I was very like pumped and had a lot of respect to him. I just like watched him when he walked in the venue. I felt like a creepy stalker just looking at him. But the thing was that something that happened was also that the Polish guys were not like happy with us because we represented Meteor Makers, and that was an organization that had financial troubles with the Polish players.
From the same year,
yeah. So I remember the pre-interview Taz had with the on stage. He said like, we want to crush them so bad, and so his anger was towards the organizations, but we felt that the anger was towards us. So what happened during that game was that we started to like have that fighting spirit, like more. We don't want us to get bullied. We're gonna bully you instead. Very childish mentality, I know, but that was our feeling going into the game. So I remember when we played against them the first map. I think we were up 8-0. They took a timeout. And I remember because Zet was in our team, and Zet was
He used to like to shout a lot, right?
Oh, he was the biggest like trash talker I've ever seen. Like he shouted, he spoke more to the team, to the opposing team than with with his team. So instead of communicating with us, he communicated with them. It was a lot of fun, but yeah, I can't imagine how fucked up it must have been playing against him. But his idea when they took the timeout was that, okay, let's stand all together, just stand on a row and hug each other and just watch the Polish guys when they have the timeouts. So they stood there and like talked, okay, maybe around tactics, what they were supposed to do, blah blah blah. We just stood next to each other, hugging each other like this, and just watched them. Very, very childish. I wouldn't recommend anyone to do that today, but like that was our mentality back then. 8-0, we went up, we had a 14-0 lead, and I remember Jumpy calling just, okay, fuck it, just rush down mid as CT on Inferno, all 5, just rush down mid. Like the purpose of that round was more like, yeah, you can get this last round. And we went on to win 16-1. We went into the other map, Nuke, and I believe it was 16-5. The game went to go very smooth and very fast. And I remember after the game when we were supposed to shake hands, obviously I was very happy, but the problem with Zet back then also was that once the game was over, he couldn't just, drop it and, okay, the game is over, let's show some respect and all that. He still had that, that mentality in himself.
To rub it in.
Yeah, exactly. So when he went on to thank for the game, he went to Luke, and Luke was so pissed off. And I remember Luke saying to Zet, let me see if I can remember the exact phrase. He said, "Say that to my face, you." I remember when he said that, and then we went over and talked in the team. And I think that's also on camera, and we just left it off, and so that was very special. Ever since that, we and the Polish guy built up some sort of rivalry. So when we played against other teams in other tournaments, they were always watching the games, and whenever we lost a round, they started to applaud, and they always cheered for the other teams. So we had this rivalry. But yeah, eventually, a couple of years after that, I became good friends with the guys who were my idols. So in the end, everything worked out good.
Listen, you know the way CS goes, right? Even when this result happened at the tournament, everyone was like, well, it's just a one-off, what happened again? And right afterwards was when you had the Dreamhack Winter Tournament that you won. Now, this is interesting because, again, because everyone's trying to like sort of narratively stack the deck against your team, the story in this tournament was like, no, this is bullshit. Look, they've got the easy side of the bracket, because you guys had the side of the bracket with like the French on, the Americans on, like the teams that weren't going to win, right? Meanwhile, on the other side, you had SK Gaming, you had FNATIC, you had the team that actually ended up getting out that side of the bracket, which was MTW with a stand-in. So you had these like monster teams. And so when MTW beat all these teams, everyone was like, right, well, if they can beat all those teams, they're just going to clean up this MYM team, they're going to win the tournament, and then even your second place will be like, well, it didn't really count. And obviously you win the whole tournament. So this must have been like, listen, coming second might be cool when you've never been to a big land, but winning's a bigger deal, right?
Yeah. That tournament was, I think, the highlight of my career, because personally for me, I do believe I played like the best CS of my life was at that tournament. So when we won, I feel like I had my contributions to us winning, but also playing in front of a Swedish crowd. Let's remember, like this was in 2009. The crowds weren't that big as they are today, but for a 2009 crowd, that was pretty big. We had like 1,200 people watching live in the arena, like in middle of the night. Like the structure as we have today was not like, yeah. I think the final started at 11 or something in the evening, and like it was a great feeling to win that tournament. And as you said, like it felt like everyone was always trying to find something to say, like, okay, they had the easier side of the bracket, or yeah, they are lucky, they beat that team, and blah, blah, blah. So we always had, like, our results didn't matter because we always had to prove ourselves. And I think that was the reason why we also did that good, because as soon as people started to say, okay, they are actually good, that's when we lost that spark to try to prove ourselves. And that's when we started to become worse. So yeah, thanks to all those people who doubted us, I think that was the reason why we wanted to prove ourselves. But as soon as we did prove ourselves after the Dreamhack final, when we won it, when people actually said, okay, they are good, they are a top 3 team in the world, the FNATIC team, the MYM team, like they are in the top 3, it's a new era for Swedish CS, and blah, 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 blah. So everyone's starting to hyping us after that Dreamhack winter victory. And that's when we like thought, okay, we have made it. Let's relax. Let's enjoy this. And yeah, that's when we fell off totally.
After this period, despite these like amazing results in the run-up, and then you have these 2 enormous international performances, everything's looking awesome in the team. Gradually, basically, then the demise of the team basically came. Then like the bad results come and you tried switching some players. But one thing I want to ask is, because it does seem tied into it, right? When you spoke there about Zet, you were talking about like, you know, things he could bring from his experience. He was obviously a very, very famous trash talker because he kind of like built it into his game. So if he killed you, you know, he would annoy you as well on top of it. So what I want to ask is this though. The time he came to your team was obviously after he'd been away and he'd been in CGS, he'd been playing CS Source, then he'd come back to Sweden, he'd come to the SK team, then he'd come to your team, right? The problem is he was so insane at 1.6 before he went to Source that, like, I have to say, even though these were good teams, he was never like the old Zet. He was never the player that, like, I always tell people this, like, he was like Forest before Forest. Like, he was unbelievably, like, raw skill, you know. So what was he actually like in your teams? Because I feel like he was one of the players, right, who eventually, like, he was just going to have to be removed if you're at the top level.
Yeah, I mean, for us, I think the reason why we even got Zet was, first off, he had so much experience. I think he was, like, the main reason why we did so good in that period, because every time when we went into a stage game or when we played against a unknown team, an international team, I think he was like the tiebreaker for us to be able to perform, because he spoke in a sense to us where we believed him. And when he said, no, you guys are better than them, like, we believed in him because he had already played against these guys. He had already won big titles as a player. But if we wouldn't have had him in the team, I think it would have taken us more time to realize that we were internationally, like on an international level, that we were that good. So I do believe he was the key factor for us to perform. But as you said, he wasn't like the old Zet. He wasn't that mad fragger running around and just popping heads. He was more of a team player back then in the MYM team. He was a player that went in first to a bomb side. I remember like a lot of times where he just jumped into a side, catching all the bullets and letting us refrag him. He was that kind of player, which made it much easier for me and for Muddy to play, because we were like the riflers back then. We were supposed to bring up the numbers, and we had Delpan on the op and Jumpy on the IGL. So I think he played like a very, very important part, and that's why. When we did bring him in, we brought him in as a star player, but we soon realized that he wasn't star material player anymore. He was a star in the terms of bringing a team together and making young talents believe in themselves. And I actually think the most successful thing that you can do today when you want to build a team, that's what this is just my thoughts, a bit out of context right now. But if you can, my idea would be to have one experienced player today, and you have 4 talents. An experienced player that has played on the big stages, has beaten the good teams, who can, with his knowledge and with his calmness, can affect his other teammates, the other 4 talents. I think that would be a very good recipe to bring up new talents. Out of context right now, but yeah,
sure.
I've thought about that, and and the reason why I've thought about that is because I thought about what was the main reason why we went on to become good, and I do believe that was set because he, for us, he was a god. So whatever he said, we believed him, and that's like when he said, "Okay, well, you guys are better than these guys." That's when we believed him. When he said, "Let's go in and we're going to win this game. We just play our game," blah blah. We believed him. But let's say if Delpan would have said had that same talk with us, I would like, "What the fuck do you know? How do you know?" Yeah, so that was the difference, and that's why I believe that kind of build up today in CSGO. Or in any other game, I think that would be a successful move to do.
Right, after that team sort of winded down and never quite got back to the same level again, I noticed when some of the other talents went elsewhere, like obviously eventually like Delpan ended up on SK Gaming and was in FNATIC, a whole bunch of scenarios, you basically got left on the outside. Like when I go and look, you were in that Rage Gaming team, which at the time people thought was going to do nothing because it was a bunch of players who were from the semi-pro scene. Most people thought like, these guys are never going to be that good, or they haven't made it yet. Like I know people thought Mane was a talent, But then the interesting detail for modern fans is there's a player called pronax in this team. Now, this is 1.6, so people need to know pronax at this point in time is still not very well known. I think you'd only maybe been in the scene for like Pro CS for like a year, maybe. Not very long at all. Back then, what was pronax like at 1.6? Was he actually an in-game leader in this team? Was he a tactical guy? What was he like?
Yeah, he was an in-game leader already back in that team. He had a different kind of approach to IGLing because I remember when I went in that team, I was the Z of the team. Obviously not like that successful as that was, but I had the like knowledge that the other players didn't have. But I think that was like the time when pronax started to develop his IGL career. And as you said, that team for me wasn't like, okay, I'm going to go and become best with this team. That team was for me more like, okay, I need to, if I want to continue playing, I need to stay in the scene and play because I don't know when I will get an opportunity to play. And yeah, I remember that time also in my career was really bad. That was like, okay, maybe my career is over. I'm just going to play for fun because I had the time. I lived at home. I didn't have any bills to pay. So I did it just for the love of the game. But at the same time, I did have some hopes on maybe I will get picked up. But I knew that, okay, this year has not been good, the 2010 year. The MYM team falling apart, people leaving. It was rough because 2009 was like a good year for the team and for me personally. But 2010, I don't know what happened. So it was a year when I started to think about other things, like should I start studying? So that I ended up studying in a university that summer, and so there was a lot of things happening in my life. But I never wanted to stop playing CS because I enjoyed it, and back in 2010 and 2009, like like you didn't play CS for the money. There was no money in CS. Like the salaries that we had in Meteor Makers was 150 euros a month. Like we were considered a top team, but we earned 150 euros a month, and in Rage we didn't earn like anything. So we just
for people who don't know, like someone like SK would have gotten like 1,000 or maybe like 1,200 or something.
Yeah. So like for some countries there was like, yeah, that's pretty good salary, but in Sweden, like the average salary is around 2,000 euros or $2,000, something like that, a bit more. So if you go around with 150, you can't do much with that. It's just like pocket money. So I play just for fun, and my experience with that Rage team was, okay, just play for fun. And I remember when we went to Dreamhack winter, I do believe that was winter, 2010. We played in a like regional series that ESL had called EPS Nordic.
Yes.
And I remember us playing against FNATIC for third place. And that was pretty funny because that was my best game of 2010. So I played really good CS back then in that game. Like, and I do believe that game was the main reason why FNATIC did bring me in afterwards, because if they would have looked at my other games, they would say like, yeah, let's not bring in this guy. But something happened in that FNATIC game where I performed, and I think that left a mark on cArn, DSN, the players that were still in FNATIC. And maybe I do believe that was the reason why they did bring me in. So my thing about this is that things can be very, very bad, but if you're always trying to be 100%, when the opportunity comes, you will never know it. But if you can manage to stay on 100%, the timing is very, very like important, and you have to be lucky with the timing. And I do believe I was very, very lucky with the timing to be able to perform in that game, because I didn't know that FNATIC were going to split up. No one knew that. So yeah.
Okay, so you've led into it perfectly there. The only thing is, when I ask you now about this team joining FNATIC, right, just don't spoil what happens at the first tournament, because that's going to be a way better question afterwards. So here's the scenario. I'll explain it to fans. The team you're talking about that you beat, and I'm sure it was this along with some of the international failures where, you know, like by the end they couldn't beat Navi and stuff like that. Basically, they'd remade the amazing team from 2009. They got Gox back from SK, so they have this crazy-ass lineup. And in that team, if people don't know, the reason why they were so dangerous is because the three really sick Swedish players was obviously Forrest, Get Right, and then Gox, and these guys were unbelievable. And so actually in that team, like cArn and DSN, who in the past used to be pretty good fraggers, they basically were sort of like supportive elements. They kind of did what Neo and Taz did in CSGO. And basically, when they're at the end of that year, because obviously I was at SK at the time, this crazy scenario happens where the story goes something like, you know, like something like cArn wanted to kick Get Right, but then Get Right and Forrest had already sort of agreed, like, we don't leave together. So then instead they came back to FNATIC and were like, no, the other way around, kick DSN and cArn, and FNATIC had to pick, and because at the time the person picking in FNATIC, it's not a CS person, it's one of the people from the org, his loyalties were to cArn, obviously, because he's the guy who built FNATIC. So amazingly, someone actually did just say, I'm just going to let Get Right and Forrest leave and go to my main rival. So when they went to SK Gaming, in this particular time period, FNATIC had to retool, they had to get players back. Now in this context, well, they're not getting Gox back because of what's just happened, the mutiny. The rest of the Swedish players are people who've either like been in SK and weren't as good, or they're kind of the people around the HUK Lions level. Like there's no one that you can compare because all the star players are in SK now. So at the time, everyone thought, like, first of all, SK is clearly going to be better. But then the other thought was, this FNATIC team's going to be trash. Because even though you got Delpan, listen, he's a skilled player, then it was like, okay, we're putting in Exist. Yeah, he was a pretty good player. You know, he had some skills. He was like an up-and-comer. And then you joined the team where, as you say, unless someone thinks about that one map, they're going to think, wasn't his team terrible? It was he. Listen, you're not Get Right and Forrest. You know that. So when this lineup gets announced, like everyone, like I say, don't spoil what happens at the event, but everyone was like, this is the end of FNATIC. Like, this is so sad, you know, they're going to be terrible. Everyone thought, for real, you'd be like a 9th to 12th sort of team from there on out, you know. When you came into this squad, give me some thoughts on like the team put together, the vibe. Like, was it actually clicking immediately? Was there anything that could hint that you wasn't going to be a team that was just okay? Because I always say to people, it's kind of like if players join Astralis this year. Listen, everyone dreams of joining Astralis if you're Danish, but you don't dream of joining it when all the good players leave. You dream of being in the one with Device and Glaive. So was there any of that sentiment? Like, have I just joined the bad FNATIC?
Yeah, 100%. That was like my feeling when I joined. Like, first of all, for me, it was just amazing to be able to get an at that time a decent salary, but also to play for FNATIC, for an like legendary organization, a team that I looked up to just 2 years prior to that moment. But as you said, when I came into the team, it didn't feel like the FNATIC team that I had built up in my head. You know, Forest was FNATIC for me, Get Right was FNATIC for me. Obviously, CARN and DSM were also. But as you said, during 2009, those players were the support players of the team. So when I came in, I was like, okay, but wait, I've also been playing a supportive role this last year. And Exist, yeah, he hasn't been a star player. Delpan, yeah, he can be a star player, but are we supposed to rely on just one player? So my thoughts going into that team was like, okay, I'm just happy that I get the opportunity. Now I will try to do my best. Are we going to win any titles? I don't believe that, but like I couldn't refuse that FNATIC invitation. So I took that, looked at the other teams. I saw the SK team. I was like, I don't want to play that team because Forrest, Get Right, Alan, Face, Robin. I was like, no way, they won't be the best team in the world with that lineup. Obviously, we had Navi breaking out at that time also. With Markelov, Edward, and those guys. So I was like, okay, yeah, this will be a rough time in this lineup. And yeah, that's the first tournament that we had. I think we had maybe 2 weeks practice going to Kiev for the Intel Extreme Masters Europe tournament.
So here we go. I'll set it up for people. That was the sentiment among even other pros, all the experts, the commentators. So this tournament comes along, and this was one of those ones where, because basically like Kiev was the European Championship. Well, you can imagine back then, like Europe just was the main region. So also, obviously, it's actually the European Championship arguably could be harder to win than the World Championship because there's less European teams at the World Championship. So at this tournament, right, when you come into it, first of all, like everyone thought, because both teams are there, well, the SK team's going to win it. Like they didn't even get out the group stage. In fact, famously, they left. And I remember because I was working with them, like they even just like booked a flight home the next day or something mad, you know, like instead of waiting the 3 days or whatever you're supposed to. Then for your team, even though you got like a close win on Navi in the group stage, again, it's very easy, especially back in the day when people go to loads of lands. Usually the top teams will just drop a random best of one, you know, and then the idea is you get it back in the playoffs, you know, you peak in the playoffs as it were for your champion. And Navi obviously with the monster team of the year before. So then you go into the playoffs, right? And this is where, if I was making like a documentary or a movie, it would just like pause here. Because in the semi-finals, if I just explain to fans, right, it was FNATIC against Navi. Navi literally, by the way, has just won the last 3 majors in a row and like broken the prize money record the year before. So every fan's like, right, well, they're going to lose. Then the other side of the bracket is MTW, who was arguably the second best team of the year before, and the Poles, who, like, this is actually when they were getting really good again. So of these 4 in the semi-finals, your team, no joke, on paper, would be the one that's least likely to win the tournament. And you beat Navi, and then you beat the MTW team, and you win the whole tournament. So this must, again, I mean, this actually it's almost reminded me of when you were in MYM and you just had this miracle run out of nowhere. Because what happened in this tournament? This seems like one of the craziest stories I've ever heard of.
Yeah, as you said, the first game when we played against Navi, home crowd, people cheering for them, playing on the stage. I do remember, like, I don't think any individual in the team like were the key factor why we won, but I do believe CARN had one of his best games in that FNATIC time when I was there. I do believe that was one of his best games. I also do believe that he did the clutch at the end. When we had 15-14, we had the B site on Inferno,
yes,
and he did 1v2 clutch. So I think overall we played good as a team. I think the thing that I learned after that first game, but throughout the tournament itself, was that CS is okay. There's a lot of pro teams today who do believe that we can just put the best player in every position. So let's have the best AWPer playing the AWP. Let's have the best rifler playing the rifle. Let's have the best individual IGL playing the IGL role. And they just think like, okay, we have the best players in every role, we will become the best. That's the way that I thought back then also. But I learned from that FNATIC lineup that, okay, the most important thing isn't that you have the best players on every position. The most important thing is like you have the right players in terms of mentality. Like, what kind of decisions will you take mid-round? For an example, my thing that I always did was I tried to refrag. So if anything happened, I would try and go refrag. Then you had other players who do not have that mentality, and just maybe like instead of going for refrag, they're standing back and holding the angle and then wait to push. Depending on like what kind of player you are, there's no right or wrong, but you need to have that good mix. And I do believe in FNATIC we had that good mix. That's the reason why I do believe that we did so good at that tournament. Also, I do believe, as you said, as everyone thought, no one thought that we would do any good. So I do believe also we had that factor playing in also, that teams didn't expect us to be good. So when they played against us, there was like, yeah, they're not the same FNATIC anymore. We're going to beat them. And then they go in and then we beat them. So like as the tournament progressed, then we got into the semifinals and we played the final against MTW. In the final, I can honestly say that we won the final because of Exist. Because I don't remember when I've been in a team when I've seen one player win a game. Usually, like even as a coach, I've always said, a player won't win you the game, the team will win you the game. This was the only time, seriously, when a player won us the game. And Exist was crazy, that final. So we ended up winning that final. And the same thing happened also as in MYM. It was a fluke. We were lucky. And the same kind of stuff was repeated. So at that time, I was like familiar to getting that kind of feedback from the community. But it was a great feeling winning with that FNATIC lineup. And I remember the FNATIC organization was very happy with us also. I remember Sam, the owner of FNATIC, he was also very happy, obviously, because as you said, he chose to go with the being loyal to his friends in CARN and DSN instead of going with the two best players, like arguably the two best players in the world back then, Forrest and Get Right. So I think overall everyone was happy, and the FNATIC fans were also happy. So it was a great time, and one of the best victories that I have experienced.
Since you mentioned CARN there, obviously this is like a perfect moment to ask you about him, because as you say, this tournament, it's funny, he obviously had so much success with Forest, and he had amazing success when they got Get Right in the team. Like, he already had loads of championships, he'd won major, it's like, got all sorts of accomplishments. But I have to say, this was actually the tournament that, to me, I would say this should be his like signature tournament in his career. This should be the one, because that's the point. When he was like one of the best leaders before, actually he was a half decent fragger, as you say, he won that clutch in his match, etc. One of the things I used to think was, back then, some of us used to be very biased, right? Basically, to us, in-game leaders were people who were wizards with tactics. It's like Ave, Veslin, if you're going back far, people who are just nerds and they come with a massive notebook and they've got every strategy and they've looked at all the demos. Whereas when I've looked at CARN, I thought, I've actually seen a lot of Swedish players like this. It's the guy where like you just get really good Swedish players around you, you call something quite loose, and then you have to frag as well. But if you do, you win, and it's like you're basically almost like a super mixed team, But if you do the right tactic, it obviously works. Now, this tournament is what made me really appreciate. Like, there's more to being an in-game leader than tactics. Like, there's being a captain. There's knowing like the right tactical calls, knowing how to use players. In this case, players that other people don't think are that good. Because to win this tournament, like, listen, it's obviously eventually the SK team did become better, and like enough talent is going to outweigh it in the long run. But give me some thoughts, because this is when I kind of started to realise, as an in-game leader, he must have something extra. Like, I'll even say, getting to know him over the years, one thing I've noticed he's got is a lot of Swedish players can be a little bit shy or don't show as much personality. He's got a lot of charisma for a Swedish guy. So give me some thoughts on CARN, the captain and the leader.
I think he, by far, the best in-game leader Sweden has ever had. I can't talk about all the in-game leaders, that wouldn't be correct for me, but I do believe, I can honestly say that I do believe he is the best. I've heard a lot of people also saying even my grandmother would be able to win titles as an in-game leader when you had Forrest, Gux, and Get Right.
Yes.
But like there's so much to like his style of calling. I learned a lot from him. I think that he's the main reason why I went up to become an IGL, and also the main reason why I became a coach, because I learned from him the way he thought. He was very good to not only call around, but he was good to explain why he did that call, and that's why we learned from him. So it wasn't. I don't think it wasn't a coincidence that me and Exist, who played for him, went on to become IGLs, because we learned from him. But at the same time, this was a time when CS didn't have that structure around the team, where you had managers, where you had mental coaches and whatever. He was everything at that time. He was the mental coach. He was the manager of the team. He was the IGL. So whenever we went somewhere, he was taking care of everything. Okay, the cabs will wait for us at 8:15. We go to dinner. I've booked a place here. So he did all that kind of thing. So he was like the dad of the team at also a young age. I think back in 2010, I don't know how old he was, maybe under 30. But he was very mature for his age. And I like ever since that period, I've always seen him as that type of godfather of Swedish CS. So yeah, that's my like picture of cArn. A very mature kind of guy, but with a lot of like responsibility. And I think he has always behaved like in the best possible way. I don't know if I've ever heard any controversy around him. I learned a lot from him as an IGL in game, but sadly, maybe not as much as a individual, how to act in the community.
Now, obviously, yeah. I can ask you now, obviously, about a teammate that you had in this team in the past, a long-time teammate, Delpan, right? Because I'm going to give people a little bit of insight now, because even though I actually was, again, I was in teams that he joined and I was around the scene at the time, he genuinely seems like one of the weirdest people I've ever met from Sweden, because on the one hand, he was super skilled, but I have to say, whenever I talked to him, he didn't necessarily have the mindset people would think. Like, he wasn't a guy where it was like about all being like pro and trying to win the tournaments. He was almost like a guy where it's like that MMA thing of like, just let me bang, bro, just like, let me fucking frag out or whatever. Because as a result, right, I'll tell you a quick story. When he came to join SK, because he obviously just left you guys and joined SK and sort of broke his contract back then, right, which was actually quite a controversial move. And also, SK sort of did it because the year before, FNATIC had done that to them with Gogs. It was like fucking, like, we're going to get you back for that. We're going to take your best player. When this happened, right, I remember this mad story where when they were contacting Delpan, they were thinking, right, we're going to have to really sweet talk this guy. We're going to have to explain him why he joined. Apparently, like, they said, like, would you be interested in joining SK? And then he just, like, wrote back, like, do I get food money? And everyone's like, what the fuck? Like, what a weird... Because obviously you're thinking, like, what, like €50 a day? But he was a weird guy like that. On the one hand, like, money seemed to be a motivator. And at the same time, sometimes in practice, I've heard he would just take weeks off, even if he was still good in the game. Who was this guy?
For me, Delpan is one of the people that I become the best friends with in the game. We don't have that much contact today, but I remember when we played in 2009, 2010, he was like a very funny guy to play with. If he was professional, absolutely not. When it came to practice, he could basically like be on Facebook. I think that was the year when Facebook also broke through, and I remember like on LANs, like when we were in FNATIC and cArn was going through tactics, like this dude Delpan, he could seriously just tab out and scroll through Facebook while he was calling tactics. So in terms of being professional, he didn't show up for practice sometimes. He always had some sort of explanation that, this happened, the dog ate another dog, and eventually, like, some sick explanations. But he was so damn good at what he did, so he wasn't... It was not easy to remove him from a team. He could behave exactly as he wanted to, and that was Delpan. Extremely good, not so professional as a player. Didn't put that much time to be professional on practice games, but when he went into these big games, big tournaments, that was when he was like super professional. But before and after those games, he was not professional. He loved to party. He was a very like fun person to be around. I'm not gonna lie. I had a lot of fun with Delpan, but it was not fun to trying to be serious or trying to be professional around him. And I also think that he could also influence other people to become less professional. I know that there was a period when I also started to go his way in terms of being professional, and I know that later cost me the spot that I had in FNATIC. So yeah, that was Delpan, a very good guy, maybe a bad influence for others.
One other thing to say is, in terms of like skill, the problem he has is, right, the big names for AWPers in the game was like, obviously in this period, Maikelele won all the majors, and then classically like Fraud, Kogu, like the big guys are from all the movies and like legendary players. So I actually feel like he's one of the people who gets left off the list, because I have to say, just eye test, he had the skills as good as any AWPer I've ever seen. Like one thing that was nuts is, I know in CSGO now, because the no scope is like it sort of hits most of the time, but not every time. People don't know. In 1.6, if you properly did the right click, left click, it hit every single time if you could aim it right in the center. And this guy, no joke, it's no wonder people thought he cheated. He would hit every single close range no scope. It's not even a joke. Like, you couldn't rush him. Like, I genuinely think his skill set, maybe because of some of these factors, he maybe could have been even better.
Yeah, I don't know. Like, I do believe that since he was that unprofessional, I do believe that that could have cost him, like, okay, let's say Forrest is still playing on a top level. I don't see a reason why Delpan couldn't have kept on playing on a top level. Yes, he's 31 years old today, but he could have been in the CSGO scene also. He did try to have some comebacks, but the problem with him was that he, like, as the time progressed, he started to show his old personality and not become that being that professional. But he had that insane skill, like doing those no scopes. He was very, very aggressive as an AWPer, which a lot of people sometimes forget about. They see these crazy highlights, but the way he moved around the map, like, he was everywhere. And he always managed to convince the IGL of the team that he was playing that, let me just do what I want. So instead of being that CT AWPer that always go for the same position, he was moving around the map all the time, which led to the opposing team. They had to flash every corner because they were afraid of the AWP being at that position, because they knew that, okay, if I dry pick this area, I might end up going into Delpan's crosshair and I will not beat him. So they had to flash every corner, which eventually led up to us knowing where the team were heading to, because they had to flash every peak. So Delpan, not only did he do these crazy frags, but he also put a lot of pressure on the other team, because he was just moving all the time. Like on Dust 2, he was moving from A-long, peeking out A-long doors, getting boost cats, pushing mid, going through mid tunnels, short. Like, all these crazy things he did was did pay out for him, because I think he was one of the first kind of aggressive uppers, and we eventually saw that later. Like JW in his prime, he was also that kind of guy who was just jumping all around, and it's very, very difficult to play against an up like that, who is constantly on a different part of the map. So I think that was like one of the main reasons why Delpan was considered so good, not only because of his frags, but also in the team. Everyone knew, like, okay, if he has a good game, which he had 8 out of 10 times, like, if he has a good game, it will be easier for us also to play, because we were just rotating around him. So if he wanted to go on my spot, I would just rotate and take his spot. But when we look at professional teams today, they're like, okay, as an AWPer, I'm going to take your spot. No, you don't take my spot. That's my spot. So the mentality and the meta today is not the same as it was back then. But I do believe that a team would gain a lot from having an AWP who is very dynamic, as Delpan was. I think that was one of the main reasons why he was that good.
Right, obviously I'm going to ask about like the return of FNATIC when you had the success towards the end of the year, but I have a different question first. This is going to be some of the first controversy of this one, but luckily this one doesn't directly involve you. So the question is this: late in the year, right, you went to a tournament, it was called MSI Beat It Russia, and it was held in Kiev, the infamous cyber arena, where, if people don't know, this is what the topic's going to be about. even in CSGO, this is still the case, where they still have the Star Ladder tournaments there. Mate, the record of teams from Russia and CIS, Ukraine, etc., in that fucking building is ridiculous. It's like, it feels like they can't lose. They win every time. It's where people don't know Niplos for the first time in CSGO. Like, obviously, Navi won all those Star Ladders, no matter who's there. So as a result, a lot of people who are Western players thought, something's going on here. Like, it can't just be that they're comfy because they're at home. Like, are they hearing the casters, for example? Maybe they can hear them through the headsets. Are they cheating in some way? And the problem is, this tournament I've referred to now is basically what opened the door for those not just to be like, paranoid thoughts you think after you lose a game, but like provable. Because at this tournament, it was the one where the Poles, the ones we were referring to before, played against Navi. By the way, still one of the best teams in the world, which is why this story's so mental. And Navi ends up winning this series really closely. But on one of the maps, I think it was Nuke off the top of my head, there's a round really late in the game where Senya, the guy who's still around now, who was like the support player of the team, turns around on stage while the round is still going on and just looks, because the stage setup was so stupid. There was just a giant projector screen behind the players, basically. He just turns around and starts watching the round there as like, I think his teammates are like in like a 2v2 or a 1v2 or something. And even though, listen, we can't know if he said anything or whatever, but that is absurd. Like, that is obviously, it's cheating. It's blatant cheating. And I remember, actually, you were one of the people, because it was all filmed at the time, I think by Fragbite or something, where even though you were just in the audience watching this game, you weren't playing, you were saying something like, this bastard's cheating or something like that. Like, it was, can you remember this scenario? Because I know, actually, after this, people like cArn, who obviously have lost a lot of like classic games to those guys, it made them have to wonder, like, were they doing that in some of the other games?
Yeah, I do remember that we were sitting and watching that game, and we saw that he looked up at the big screen, and then he turned around, and we didn't see if he said something or whatever. But that was like very frustrating because, as you said, a lot of times we did think, okay, do they have some sort of advantage when they play here? Like, even when we went to Asia, we like knew, okay, maybe we don't understand what the casters say. The headphones weren't that good, so you could hear what the casters could say. Obviously, the big screen just behind the players, like, insane. Even though, like, if you didn't look at the screen like that, it was enough for you to just like watch your teammate's screen, and you can see like in the edge of the eye, you could see like where on the map they are watching. So like that setup was really, really bad. I don't know if teams use that to their advantage, but I remember that particular case where I saw that. I remember that I was frustrated because we went up and played against them, I do believe, right after that game. I don't remember if it was a final or semi-final, but I do remember that I felt like very bad for the Poles because they weren't aware of it. So right after the game, we went up, we talked to them, and I remember, I think it was Taz who was really upset and had a discussion with the admins, with the Navi team. Like, he was ready to basically go out and fight them. I remember back then Pasha, he was like, at that time also very big, so I was like, okay, this dude might like become aggressive, but Pasha was like very calm and like didn't take it to the next level. And I remember like at that time also I changed my nickname when we played against Navi. My nickname was Pita, and then I had 4 again because they were called again at that time.
Yes.
So I tried to protest in my way, like playing for the Poles that final. And if you remember what I said before, that the Poles were always cheering for the other teams that we played. This was like the first time that they cheered for us, which was that's when we like became friends in some sense. But yeah, I remember that tournament, and I also remember exactly that moment where I saw it on the big screen and all that. Yeah.
Another thing is, this is the time period where, like I say, after the slump in the summer, you lost Delpan, the team retooled, because what they did is, finally, Gox was able to be in FNATIC again. So he came back from, I think it was like Lions or something, one of like the other Swedish teams, got in Fries, the Danish AWPer, who people might know was in sort of early CSGO briefly, just wasn't as good in CSGO. And in this team, it was like, actually, it's more similar to the one you had that won the IEM. It's like, again, it's not like there's a player who's the best player in the world, but there's like a nice spread of players, nice skill, and the team got very very good again. And obviously it culminated at the end of the year with winning Dreamhack Winter, which is a very stacked tournament. And I know even back then, like CARN was trying to tell me, like, no, maybe we should be ranked just the third best team of the year because we won the best tournament, like doing his usual PR angle. So what was this team like? Because it seemed like it was a pretty good squad again.
Yeah, I mean, that was like actually a team that I believed in, because at that time I also started to perform better individually. I had a time when they removed me and they got me back in like a week after. That was that summer in FNATIC. But then when I got back, I started to like perform better individually. And Exist was still on the team. He was doing good. Freeze was a very good opper. He was not Delpan like skill level, but he was a very good opper. And obviously CARN, the IGL, and then Gux, who was also at that time like brilliant. So we had a good mixture of players in the team and went on to win that Dreamhack tournament. And like that, for me, like the Dreamhack tournaments for me was like a major today, because all the best teams were there.
Yes.
And yeah, I remember when we played a final. I think we played a final again against
Lemondogs.
Oh yeah,
threatened those guys.
Correct.
Yeah, they won the other side of the bracket.
Yeah. And also the same, like CARN clutching in the end, 1v1. And I remember the final round was very tense. It was on Tuscan, which I believe is a very, very good map. But yeah, that tournament was also like pretty insane, because I remember the emotions when we won. Like, yeah, I can show emotions. I can be very happy, but like watching the clips of that moment when we won, I was very, very happy. Like, I just grabbed the first person I could and I lift him up. I think that was CARN, so CARN was coming to me and I lift him up when we won. And Sam Matthews was there, and a manager, I forgot his name, was also there. So we were just like super, super happy. And that was also a time where the focus was on other teams. We were the underdogs. Yes, we were considered a good team, but we were not the like contender to win that tournament. There was always other teams that were spoken about, and yeah, we went on to win that tournament. So that was a great feeling also.
I know this might be a weird question, but I have to ask it in light of the stories we've told in this interview. Is there something about your career? Like, do you think you were destined to play CS? Because I'm not talking like, listen, you're not simple in the game or something, but how many times are you going to have this crazy story where your team's not even supposed to be the favourite and then they have an amazing run and win the whole tournament? It's happened a few, like more times to you than a lot of players in their whole career.
Yeah. I don't know if I'm destined to, but CS has like... I played CS for a long time without any without knowing if this game will be if I'll be able to live just playing this game or work around this game. So CS has always been like my biggest passion in life. Yeah, but yeah, I don't know. It's a difficult question to ask to answer, but
do you think you're a lucky guy?
100%. I think I'm very lucky with the fact that I've been able to play this game. Like all the obstacles, like I don't try to victimize myself. Obviously, there's a lot of people in this world who have much bigger obstacles doing what they want to do. But I do believe that I had some sort of obstacles, and I managed to beat those obstacles and be able to do what I love. And I'm happy that I got the chance to do this. Yeah, so if I'm lucky, 100%, yes.
Since you said in the Delpan story, that interesting thing that maybe he like sort of influenced you and maybe you were partying a bit too much and getting here, right? I've got an interesting question that it's going to throw you off because it's just, again, where I have like a ridiculous memory for stuff. I remember it was actually one of the tournaments when it was like DSN's last tournament. It was when you were at E-Stars Seoul in Korea, right? And at this tournament, like I knew Gox when he was in SK, etc. I remember at one point I came down in like the elevator to go and I don't know, go to the after party or something. And like you and Gox were there and then Gox was like, what are you doing? And I was like, just going to the after party. It's actually one of the rare times I ever went to an after party. It's because I was going to stay for like a week in Seoul afterwards. And then he goes like, "Oh, we're going to the gym," and you and him were like off to the gym. I was like, "What the fuck?" And then basically he said something like, "Oh, it's what we're doing. Like we just go to the gym like the whole event now." But this sounds like a total contrast to the lifestyle Delta. Were you just easily influenced by teammates or something? It sounds like whoever the like big personality is, you just get drawn to them and you just start doing what they do.
when I worked a couple of years ago at the bank, my boss told me that I'm a chameleon because, like, depending on who I hang out with, I tend to like be as that person. And I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but yeah, I can easily. I'm maybe better at it today, but knowing like when I was younger, I could easily be influenced by others, and that's also maybe a reason why I had some controversies throughout my career. Yeah, I think you are onto something in terms of that. Yeah, yeah. Maybe I don't know if my character is that bad. Maybe something.
So, okay, one of the things a lot of people might not know is that you were a player in CSGO. Like, the game came out, you started playing. In fact, you even were sort of, it's like a throwback. You went back to, yeah, the NIP was the best, and there was all these big teams. You were back playing with pronax. You were in his AbsoluteLegends team. Funnily enough, even with some of the players, you had that old guy from your Rage gaming team, Liddy. You had a bunch of people from back in the day, right? I actually heard that those teams, but I heard that basically from the beginning of CSGO, pronax was always getting offers from like FNATIC and top teams, and they kept asking, but bizarrely, I don't know if it's something with a 1.6 career where he was never in the top teams. He used to just keep saying no, though, and keep playing with, I guess, just people he wanted to play with. He kind of had that vibe. Like, what were these early teams like? Because, like, when you look back, some of the results also are way better than people would expect. Like, you're having some semis, and you're in the mix at the time, but it's not a famous name that people remember.
Yeah, in the beginning of CSGO, I think it was similar to 1.6 kind of mentality where you switch teams a lot and you played with different kind of players, and it was still considered a hobby and all that. You cannot compare with the today professional scene. But at that time, I also, like, as I said before, I hadn't finished school, so I was still in university, and it was just like a hobby for me to play in a professional team. We tried to be professional. We had the backing. We played the tournaments that we could play, but I think like the lifetime of a team back then was maybe 6 months maximum. Like, on that level, we were not the pro team as other teams were. And like in the beginning of CSGO, it's maybe similar to Valorant today. You don't know exactly which team is the best. A lot of like switches happened, and there was like a lot of source players coming in, and these source, I remember these source guys, they had the advantage of knowing the like movement and the flashes and like all the nade utility, a little bit of the recoil. So we saw a lot of source players being brought into these top teams. But like from my perspective, the 1.6 players were always like, that was where the best players were. And the players who couldn't play on the top level in 1.6 went on to play source. That was like, I do believe maybe the community saw it as that, but when CSGO came, that's when the source players started to like mix up with the 1.6 players. That's why we saw Thorin and Freiburg, who were source players. That's why we saw them going mixing up with the NIP team with Forest, Exist, and Get Right. And also, like when I played in AbsoluteLegends, I do believe that we had a guy called RDL who was playing in source for some. I think for Dignitas in the UK scene. So that was like a time where I think CSGO was still tested and trying to see like, okay, how is this game supposed to be played? Eventually it led up to all these source players being left out, except for maybe the French players and for Fiflaren and Freiburg. But so that was for me personally, that was just a time when I wanted to play. Everyone was switching to CSGO. 1.6 was dead. Okay, let's just play CSGO. Let's see how it goes. I'm still studying, so I can play this game, and if it goes good, maybe something happened. If it doesn't, okay, I'm doing it in my spare time. So yeah, that was like the mentality I had. So I hadn't the mentality as I had before when I went in and I wanted to become successful. I wanted to become professional. I wanted to play this game because the money wasn't there. And I was turning at that time like 23 and like thinking of the the support from my family, like, okay, time for you to move out. You need to like to build up your own life and all that talk. So for me, it was like, okay, main focus was finishing off university and then getting a full-time job and starting like a new chapter of my life and leaving CS behind. But I love that game so much that I kept on playing when I had the time. And I think that was when you ask me, am I lucky? But I seriously do believe I'm lucky, because if I weren't playing that game when I had the time to do it, then I wouldn't be where I am today, or wouldn't have got the chances that I got afterwards. So there's a lot of luck throughout my career, 100%.
If we skip forward a little bit, later on you were in the Lemondogs team where Delpan's back playing with you. You actually had a couple of the players who went on to be in the LGB team, which was very good later. You even had the infamous Zealous, one of the first ever potential cheaters in CSGO, if people know that story from beforehand. Right. In this team, you also had like almost like one of your 1.6 runs, like a tournament where at the time, like NIP's the best team, the French teams are the other teams that are really good, like maybe the CIS squads have like the top team Virtus Pro at the time. But you had this Dreamhack Bucharest tournament where you made the final, you beat a bunch of good teams, the RV, beat the FNATIC team. Like, this was one of your last, like, big runs in terms of your pro career. What was this team like? It seems like, again, it's a team with, like, some potential and some good players. Like, what was this era like? Were you the in-game leader of this team, by the way?
Yeah, that was when I started to in-game lead, actually. And the reason why I started to in-game lead was because they didn't have an in-game leader. So I took that role. Basically, I remember when they asked me to join that team, it was very like straightforward. The owner of Lemondogs, who is also working at Inferno Online, is a very like have a like been in this scene for a long time. He messaged me like the same day as a tournament in Sweden. He messaged me and said like, okay, our player Twist. The Twist guy who played in NIP recently, he said, Twist is not able to come to this tournament. He's sick. Can you just fill in? And I hadn't played CS for a while. And I was like, yeah, sure, why not? Because I was free that time. I couldn't go. So Budak, who is the, he was an owner of Inferno Online. He was a manager for SK.
Yes.
He did pick me up and we went to that tournament together. And I don't remember exactly how it went. I don't think it went that good. But that was like the lucky timing for me to get into that team, because that's how I got to know the Lemondogs guys. And when I started to play with them, and eventually we switched some players, and we ended up going to that Dreamhack Bucharest tournament. And same thing was like here. We were considered more of a mixed team than a real team. And then we had all those big teams. I remember like Astana Dragons was a team back then. NIP, who was, I think they were still on that 87-0 run.
They weren't, but they were winning all the tournaments still.
Oh, yeah. So we went there and the expectations weren't that big. We had a tough group. I do believe we had FNATIC in our group, who just had... Did they just win that Dreamhack tournament, the major, maybe?
No, that was after. This was before they got pronax.
Okay. Yeah, so, we had a tough group. I remember also we had a Serbian team in our group with Janko, with Kasad, with Nico.
Yes.
And I knew Nico from back then. He was like a young guy with potential, but yeah, we saw that as an easy game. But I remember Nico playing really, really good. So that was when I opened my eyes to that guy. And we went on to, I do believe that we beat FNATIC in that group stage, and we got a easier side of the bracket, because what happened was that NIP played against Astana Dragons in the semi-final, which was supposed to be the final, and we played Navi in our side of the bracket, and we did beat Navi. And Navi at that time wasn't that good, because Navi, I do believe Navi still believed that they could hold on to the 1.6 players and be as successful in CSGO, but they weren't. So it's not the Navi as today. It was a much weaker Navi.
Yes.
And then we went on to play the final against NIP. We didn't stand a chance. I mean, they just owned us big time. And prior to that, NIP played a much closer semi-final against Astana Dragons. And I do remember GetRight saying after the tournament, like, okay, the real final was against Astana Dragons in the semi-final. Sure. And I never argue against that. Usually, like when someone said some things like that, I didn't mind to be vocal and to bring that subject up in person or on the internet. But that was like one of the first time where I was like, yeah, he's right. I'm not going to argue against that. So yeah, that was the Dreamhack tournament in Bucharest for us, 2013, I do believe. Yeah.
Yes. The last run I wanted to ask about before we go on to the coaching stuff and the other things is when you were in that briefly in that SK Gaming team, which the next year at Dreamhack Summer had like a nice little run to top 8. And to do so, this is the key detail, a lot of people won't know, because in the group stage, you beat FNATIC twice. And this was the FNATIC that had won the major and still was like, a top 8 team of the world. They were top 8 of the previous major after that. Like they were still, basically, your team basically split that team up. That's the reason why they went and got Olaf Meister and Crims and kicked out the players. They had like Schneider and whoever, Devil Walker retired or whatever. When they made this change, like it's because they got grouped at a Dreamhack. They didn't get out the group stage. And this was, again, this time, instead of Delpan, you had Maikelele, who obviously went on to do interesting things. So you had like a very weird team where it was like a semi-mix as far as I know, right? Didn't SK sort of pick you up last minute for it or something? It wasn't like a proper like pro team in the same sense, right? It was kind of the last hurrah. So give me some thoughts on this.
Yeah. Okay, so first off, when we were in Lemondogs, we got picked up by SK. And I do believe that was it was Delpan who had the contacts with SK, so he spoke with them, and we joined up with SK, and then eventually Delpan left the team. I don't remember the exact reason why he did leave the team, but I assume it's the professional part that he didn't want to practice. So I stayed in SK with let me see, Maikelele, Skytten, Roke, and Emilio. So
yes,
very weird like team in terms of like international skill, and I was the in-game leader. And I remember, when we played at Dreamhack, when we played against FNATIC, we played them on Inferno. And the thing is, like, if we would have played them on any other map, they would have beaten us.
Right.
Like seriously, the only map that we could play and we could play it good was Inferno, because we knew how FNATIC were playing that Inferno game. We knew that they focus as terrorists, they focus 100% on using their utility to take mid. But once they take mid and they're supposed to go into site, they don't have any nades usage at all. So our thing as CTs back then was, let's just fake that we're controlling mid and then just fall back to the site. Let them use their utility to take mid, and when they're going into the site, they won't have any utility left. They don't know how they will take the site, and we just waited for them to come up a site. So we did win that game. We were obviously very happy. I think we played Virtus Pro after that. We lost on Train 16-10 or 11 or 9. I don't remember the exact score. And then we played against FNATIC again. I was like, this is really bad, because obviously they want to get back at us and win that game. But the worst thing that they could do at that time was to pick Inferno against us again. I don't know what happened in that team, if they were like so confident that they were going to beat us again. But they wanted to play Inferno again. We played Inferno. We did beat them again, which eventually led up to us going to the quarters and them dropping out of that tournament, which was a big disappointment for FNATIC, because they were considered to be a top team back then. And now afterwards, maybe the major titles of FNATIC, maybe I helped them.
You need the finder's fee for that one. Yeah.
Without them knowing, I don't know. Now, jokes aside, but that was that Dreamhack tournament for us. And we went on to lose in the quarters. Considered like decent. Maybe if we were to put it in context in today's ranking, maybe like a between top 10 and top 20. So,
sure.
Pretty decent. Not a title contender at all, but we could play CS. But that was the time when I decided to, university is done. I've got my first real job. I'm going to start on the 1st of September. Right after that tournament, I gathered the group and I told them my career is over now. As a player, I'm going to go and work. That time in SK, I think my salary was 500 euros. So a bit better than the first contract that I had, but still I can't move from my parents with 500 euro. I need to get a full-time job, and the other guys were younger than me. They were still living at home. They could play the game without basically any salary just to play. I couldn't, so I had a very like bad timing in terms of choosing. Okay, should I not work or stay home and play and hope for the best, or should I go with the safe choice? And at this time, it was 2014.
14, yeah.
Yeah, I'd keep in mind that I'd played at that time. I'd played 6 years professionally with the contract, 6 years. Nothing had happened during those 5-6 years. So knowing what I know today, obviously that was a very bad move for me to stop playing. But what I knew back then was, okay, I haven't earned anything in these 5 to 6 years. This game will always be on this level. It will always be just a hobby project, and that's why I stopped playing. I do also believe that's why a lot of these old players also stopped playing. The MTW
Yes.
guys and all those players. And I think like the main reason also why, because people who lived in Western countries where the living standards was a bit higher, they had to stop in order to be able to financially like live okay. But people from other countries, like from where I come from Bosnia, or from like Eastern countries, like where the living standards, where the wages aren't that high, they could make a living out of CS.
Sure.
And that's why I do believe maybe that we saw these Virtus Pro guys stay around for a longer time. And maybe the Russian players also. So
Yes.
yeah.
Okay, one thing I want to ask about is, we'll get obviously now to the coaching part, Sarah, but I have a connecting question, because obviously you played in this team with Maikelele, although I think that might even have been back when his name was like Exum, which is probably the stupidest alias ever in the history of Pro CS, but whatever, we'll ignore that. Then obviously you coached him when he was actually in the team when he replaced Faruk when Faruk retired, right? Now Maikelele is someone where obviously, somehow, even though he's like been in a lot of teams, he's also had scenarios where he gets kicked out, sometimes from his own teams, and then he's also, it's almost like drama in a way has followed him, but no one ever publicly ever really says what the drama is. Like, no player's ever called him out publicly. He just has some sort of drama behind the scenes, except maybe that last team he was in recently, the Godsent team. So can you explain this guy to me? Because I noticed, again, when you were his coach, that you were very friendly with this guy. He was one of the people you sort of taken under your wing. Can you kind of explain who Maikelele is?
For me, Maikelele, like when I first got to know him, the thing is with Maikelele that I thought in the beginning was that he had a personality that could seem a bit weird. Like he wasn't the social standard of a person. Like the way he brought up discussions to the table and stuff like that. It wasn't the kind of normal Swedish mentality kind of guy who, in the way he would like bring up discussions, like he could say exactly what he felt, and like having 5 guys in a team, and you're young guys and you're supposed to be like tough and have this masculine thing and being like buddies and all that. He was more, I wouldn't say feminine, but he was more easier to talk about problems. And I think a lot of people maybe saw that as weird. I remember that I saw that as weird. Now, today, I can see it from a different perspective. I think he was maybe a bit more mature than the rest of us. But as a person, like having him around you as a friend or going to an after party or traveling somewhere, he was like a lot of fun. But he had a different personality typing behind a computer and a different personality in person. And I don't know if that's like if it was more difficult for him to express his feelings like when typing or talking through TeamSpeak or whatever. But he had a different vibe around him. And I do believe maybe people saw that as him being a bit weird or something. I don't know. Because I knew that I had that feeling back then. And I saw that as something... Yeah, something weird. He was not that normal social type of guy that everyone else was. He was sticking out, more open to talking about soft things, about discussing soft things, and maybe that did. It's like maybe people saw that as a reason to have him removed. He was a little bit vocal, like he was could show some feelings, but it was never like being a bad person. All these talks, like being toxic and blah blah blah. Me personally, I cannot like say how it has been in FaZe and in these other teams that he has been to. But for me personally, when I played with him and also coached him, I never saw those tendency of him being toxic. He did have some issues with having that self, trusting in himself, because sometimes when the game went bad, he could be like, nah, I don't want to play the op right now. I'm going to go into different like position, which ended up people having to play differently because he didn't want to play the way he were supposed to play. So that was like one of the problems we had in NIP with him, that he could just like drop. But the main reason why NIP removing was they thought he had some mental issues, which wasn't the case. And the players also said that afterwards, that removing him was the biggest regret that they had afterwards. So my picture of Maikelele was that, like, overall like a good guy, decent guy, a bit different from everyone else, but I think in a sense where it's good, because he talks about problems and he's not afraid to talk about problems that usually people will just like scrap off and just walk away from. He tends to bring those up. Maybe some people don't like that. Maybe that's why they see it as a reason to remove him. Him being toxic, I have never experienced that, so I cannot talk for other people. But from my perspective, I do not agree with those topics around him.
This video was kindly supported by Eddie, Chris with a K, Lager15, Pronogo, Shenlong, Zachary Carter, Adam Ox, Alexander Rao, Andreas Crockneys, Animosity, Dean Tanglis, Eric Hillestad, Hades, J Dobbs, Jensen Gore, Joseph Ginsberg, Kovacevic, Tobias Bernasconi, Zumba, Zyrathenia, and as always, special thanks going out to my boy Jerky's Minion. Want to suggest topics or guests for my shows? Want to ask me questions in my monthly AMA? Do you want teasers? Who are the upcoming guests? Maybe you want to be part of one of those discussions I do where we nerd out. Well, if so, put your money where your mouth is and join the Scrolluminati today by using the Patreon link in the description box below.